Hey everyone, hope you're having a good day. So, wanted to talk about something I did yesterday with my boys and kind of the information I gleaned from it. So, yesterday I was watching the movie Inside Out. It's an animated film from Pixar. And I won't give away the plot of the movie. I'll give away the basic context of it. So basically, it's talking about a little girl, probably middle school aged, and her internal emotional processes. And it broke down her internal emotional processes into five basic emotions: joy, sadness, fear, disgust, and anger. And that's pretty much on point. And depending on who you ask, there are either four basic emotions or six, with the only other of the six, the only other being anticipation or surprise. And basically, the whole crux of the movie is how those different emotions play together. How do they interact? How do they balance? How do they serve each other? And each of those emotions really has a primary purpose, with ideally, the overwhelming majority of it being joy. But as we come to find out, these emotions mix together. They serve their functions, but they work together. They're not independent. They don't just sit in a silo by themselves. Very rarely do we only feel one of those at a time, and with good reason, because the other emotions, sadness, fear, disgust, anger, surprise, all serve a purpose. If you go back to, I guess, caveman evolutionary days, those different emotions served a survival purpose. They helped us to process our environment, helped keep us away from things that were not safe for us, and helped us to move when we needed to move. And another way of saying emotions is energy in motion. And that's really fundamentally what emotions do for us. So, in many ways, when we're younger, when we're kids, we look at those emotions and we think that we're feeling one of those at a time. And in many cases, we don't have the emotional vocabulary or understanding to feel multiples at a time, and we may confuse one for the other. There's many times where we confuse disgust for fear. There's many times where we confuse anger for sadness, and vice versa. And there's many times where we confuse surprise with joy. Just because something's new doesn't mean it's good. And so it goes through this process of this girl and her life events and talks about how those different emotions play within her life. But it also talks a bit about growing up. And again, not to give away the movie, I highly recommend watching it if you haven't seen it, or watching it again if you have. But the other thing that it does is it talks a lot about growing up, what the process of growing up is. And in an adult sense, we're still growing up, but you could call it evolving, which is that some of the things that were vitally important to us before, some of the things that were our everyday, they were our best friend, they were, the most important thing we could think of at a younger age, at an earlier stage, are things that have to be sacrificed, are things that have to be forgotten, are things that have to be deprioritized as we get older, as we become more mature, as we go on to our next stage in life. And that can be a hard thing to do, because some of these things are so core to us, they're so near and dear to our heart, we don't want to let those things go. But in order to properly put context on what's going on in our lives now, sometimes we have to move some of the things from the past out of the way. The other thing to take into account is, while I mentioned before, you could say the goal for many of us, especially in Western society, is that we have a higher balance of joy in our lives, is the reprioritization of those other emotions, especially sadness, fear, disgust, and anger. Because in many cases, those emotions are actually what it takes to move you in the direction that can bring you back to joy. Sometimes it takes sadness in order to be seen, in order to be heard, in order to be felt, so that you can then reclaim joy and connection with the people around you. Sometimes it takes fear to keep you away from things that would do you harm, as opposed to going into a situation that would add danger and stress to your life. Same thing with disgust. There are things that are flat out not good for us. And if we did not have an internal barometer of what is good and right and healthy for us and what is bad and wrong and dangerous for us, then we might walk into situations that would not only rob our joy, but also potentially rob our health. And lastly is anger. And this is one that to some degree is overused, but in other degrees is underused. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. When I say it's overused, there's a lot of things in this world, in our modern day world, that people simply don't agree with. If you look at our politics of the day, if you look at social issues of the day, there's lots of things that people just are expressing anger at and rage, and people are getting their blood boiling, and they're at the point where they're ready to fight, they're ready to kill, they're ready to do all of these things over something that is not personally attributable to them. Now, they may associate some part of their identity with this issue or that issue, or they associate some part of a group that they belong to's identity with this thing or that thing. But it doesn't personally affect their life. So that anger is kind of vicarious rather than personal. It's not like somebody's attacking my home or my family. It's somebody's attacking my sense of identity. And really, many of those things are more rooted in fear or possibly disgust or possibly sadness than they are in genuine anger. And so in that regard, we're finding that anger is being overutilized in our world, and with good reason, because it's actually a very good motivator of human behavior. It's one of those things that if you want to mobilize a group of people, make them angry and you'll get them to move. But it can put false anger into the hearts of people, and that can be dangerous. Now, the other part is the underutilization of anger. So there are quite a few things that nowadays people fear or are sad about, or frankly have disgust for. And they're things that people feel powerless to do something about. People feel that they don't have the agency to make that change in their life because they're only one person. Whereas the reality is, if you take enough people with the same or similar feeling, whether it be sadness over the current state of events or fear over what might happen with the current power structures, or disgust over how power is being used, that can collectively be used to anger, which might, in fact, create the kind of change that we're looking for. So part of why the movie struck me is one of the things that I did differently watching it last time as opposed to previous times that I've seen the movie is I started to look at that girl in the movie, and I considered that girl from the perspective of a collective or a universal consciousness and said, okay, so if this girl is the human race, or any subset thereof, let's say it's a country, let's say it's the United States. If this girl represents the United States, what's the collective joy of the United States? And what are the things that we do to maintain that joy in our life? What's the sadness of the United States? And how does that play out in the different ways of our existence? What's the fear? What is it that we're fearing? What are the many things that we're fearing? How does that play out in terms of disgust? And then how is that mobilized in terms of anger? And it's interesting that when you watch the dialogue, you watch the news, you watch the politics, you watch the social commentary, you watch reality TV, or even just, conversations on the internet, you will see those emotions at play, and in many cases they're simplified, they're oversimplified to just one emotion. And when you get into real conversations with people, you find there's more emotions at play, there's more things happening there, but people like to simplify and boil things down to its lowest common denominator, and so they never really get a rich understanding of what it is they feel, what it is other people feel, and how that connection to each other and what we feel about a given topic, any topic, we never really get to that point of connected enough to feel that we have agency to make the changes we want to make in our world. It seems like only recently, where we're talking about the floods in Texas and Louisiana, talking about the wildfires all up and down the West Coast heading up through Canada, and now the hurricane that's presently headed to Florida and may turn up the southeast coast. That when we have these natural disasters, these large events among a major swath of people, that we feel more connected to each other and more of one consciousness than we do in our everyday lives. And that can be a good thing. That can be a very good thing. I mean, as unfortunate as those natural disasters are, as unfortunate as how those affect people's lives and destroying, everything that people had, unfortunately taking the lives of some, for those of us that are still here, we may yet reap the benefits of that level of connectedness. And so I consider that to be a good thing. But I think the next stage or next step that we need to take in our universal consciousness, and I say not just in a national American sense, but in a global sense, because for all the natural disasters we have here, there's that and worse happening in Sierra Leone and Nigeria and Bangladesh and India and Pakistan. And we're not connecting to those folks who are hurting every bit as much as us, if not more. To the folks in, where are the Rohingya? I think it's the Philippines. The Rohingya that are being slaughtered en masse. To the peoples in Iraq and Syria who are being slaughtered en masse by both sides. There's plenty of devastation to go around, but it takes that connection in order for us to be able to use the various emotions that we have and use them in combination. Use them in a way that is mature. Use them in a way that helps us to understand what we really feel about them and how we really feel connected to them. So I guess in some ways, my hope is that as we're globally going through this next stage of advancement, we're not just so focused on our technology and our toys that we lose our connection and that we lose our evolution in understanding ourselves, understanding our communities, our broader global community, and understanding our world, because those emotions, those core experiences of life, when taken from a broader scale and taking in the entire human organism, can be a very, very powerful thing. So that was my takeaway. I hope it's a benefit to you. I know it's been a benefit to me, and we'll keep going down this path. More questions, more answers, and hope to talk with you soon. Have a good day. God bless.